born?
My name is Ethel Jean Higginbotham. I was a Smith. At the time we got our marriage license, the clerk asked me if it wouldn't be easier for Hig to change his name to mine. I've never gone by Ethel. I've always gone by Jean. I am now 87 years old.
When were you born?
I was born in 1924, March 11, 1924, in a little town called Louviers, Colorado. The village was built by DuPont for workers that worked at the DuPont plant that manufactured dynamite and TNT for mining purposes.
Who's Hig?
I've always called my husband Hig. His name is Kenneth Orland or Higginbotham, but when I met him, he was in the service, and all of his friends called him Hig, and I've always called him Hig.
So when you were growing up in your house, did you have electricity in your house?
We had electricity in our house. My grandparents, who had a dairy farm, my mother's parents, did not have electricity, and I used to go stay with them, and I remember little things about their home that was different, that they didn't have electricity or running water. You had a pump that you had to go out and pump the water.
What other things do you remember about that house that were different?
It had an upstairs, and I used to go stay overnight with my grandmother, New March, and it was just a regular sort of old-fashioned house, but I remember, having the wash basin in the kitchen when the workers would come in and wash their hands at the wash basin, and just have a lot of fond memories about it. My grandmother raised chickens and turkeys, and I used to be really afraid of the turkeys because they'd fan their feathers up, and it was scary. If you're only 2 or 3 years old, they tend to chase you.
Can you tell us how old you are again?
Yeah, I am 87 years old. I kid people and tell them sitting down I'm 25. Standing up, I hate to say, I'm 87.
How many kids do you have?
My husband and I had 8 children. Ken is the oldest. Jan is 17 months younger than Ken. Rick is 2 years younger than Jana. And Jeff is 2 years younger than Rick. Jeff is 4 years younger than Rick. I'm getting everybody mixed up here. When you have 8 children, you tend to do that. You tend to mix their names up even. So Ken is the oldest, Jan is next, Rick's next, Jeff, Joni, Jocelyn, John, David.
After raising 8 kids, what advice do you have for new parents?
Just be patient, and every child is different. Every child responds to commands differently. I always laugh because I said Rick would just keep being naughty until he finally got a spanking. Then he would straighten up. So I think you just have to know that every child is different and just have lots of patience.
How many grandkids do you have?
I have 26 grandchildren and 38 great-grandchildren.
When did you get married?
I was married March 3rd, 1944.
Tell me the story about what happened 3 days later. Didn't you say 3 days after you got married, he went off to...
Yeah, he went to officers training shortly after we were married.
So,
We were married in a little brown church in Luviers, Colorado. It was pretty picturesque. For some reason, it was snowy when we got married.
and then will you say 3 days later?
Yeah, I lived with my cousin in Denver, and so Hig and I stayed there for about 3 days, and then he left to go to officers training back east. I couldn't go with him because he had to live in the barracks, and so he said we could see each other on his way to eat his evening meal. So I stayed and lived with my cousin and worked for Western Union in Denver.
How did you and Hig meet?
Actually, where I worked at Western Union, I was a Western Union messenger at that time. And the girl that was a Western Union messenger with me had a friend that came and wanted to date her that night. And she said she already had a date. And he sort of turned to me and said, "What about you?" And I said, "Oh, my cousin and I are going out to dinner." And so I thought that was the end of it. But my girlfriend told him where we lived, and he showed up on our doorstep before we could leave. His name was Stonecipher, and so we went out he took the two of us out to dinner, and when we went to this restaurant, there were a bunch of his friends that he was working with in the Air Force, and one of them came, which was not my husband, but another fellow came with us when we went to a picture show. But then this fellow whose name was Stonecipher started dating my cousin, and so then the next time that he had a date with her, he brought my husband Kenneth Orr Higginbotham with him, and that's how I met him. So it was kind of a blind date thing. I talked to my mother on the phone after that date, and she asked me how the date was, and I said, "Oh, I don't know, he's just little." You have to know that my father was 6'2", so my ideal of a husband would have been somewhat taller.
Okay.
Of course, this is like doing my life story. I keep thinking of things I should have said. Should have said that it is sort of interesting that we got to date for a whole year before we got married, which was unusual for wartime. But Hig's grandmother had said that she prayed that he would not ever have to go overseas, and there were several times that he was almost the head of the list to be shipped overseas, but he never went overseas.
What is your most favorite moment with Grandpa?
That's a hard one. Lots of good things happened. Probably the first time that we really could get away together, and we had 4 children at the time. We drove to Denver, left our children with my mother and dad, got on the train and went to Chicago and went to 3 ball games and came back. But it was the first time that we really had been able to have any time that we were just us.
You watched the Chicago Cubs play?
Yep. 3 ball games.
What was your favorite thing that you liked to do with Grandpa the most?
I just like to be with him. I've laughed because somebody asked me if I really like to fish, and I said, well, it probably wouldn't have been the first thing that I would have chosen to do, but that was one of his passions, that he liked to go fishing, and so we spent a lot of time going fishing together. And then when we had children, it became a family sort of thing, and we went fishing a lot. And so, but even after the kids were grown and he was working, just driving around fields in the summertime to check how peas were growing and how beans were growing, he would come home and ask me if I'd like to go with him. And I'd always try to go with him. In fact, that's how I started raising bread in the refrigerator, which sounds strange, but one time he wanted me to go with him, and I had started to make bread, and I said, oh, how can I go now? I've got this bread that's started to raise, and put it in the refrigerator. And that was where the prettiest loaves you ever saw. I started putting them in the refrigerator after that. It was just fun for us to be together.
What do you miss most about Grandpa?
I've had friends tell me that it must be really terrible to be alone in the evenings, and I laughingly say, no, it's much the same, because I like to stay up and he'd like to go to bed early. So I'd go visit with him, laying in bed, and then I'd get back up and read and do whatever I wanted to do in the evenings. So evenings have never been so bad. It's having to come home if you've seen something that you want to share with somebody, and you come home and there's nobody there to do that. So you miss that, and I miss the fact that you have to make all the decisions on your own. There's nobody to bounce it off of, and so those are the things that I find hard. And then I don't have anybody to write dust on my furniture. I have to always laugh about that, because I think about that when I see dust on my furniture, that one time he wrote, "Dust me" on the furniture.
He labeled it for you. That's fine. How did you get into painting?
I always, as I grew up, I always liked to try to draw things. I used to, there were magazines that had movie stars on the front. I used to try to draw movie stars' faces. One time my dad said to me, "It looks like her face is dirty," and it was, where I'd tried to shade it. So I just grew up always liking to draw, and I said I'm not bragging, but, like when I was in grade school, I could probably draw better than the teacher could. And it was just something that came naturally to me. So, but I never was able to take any art classes as I was growing up. They didn't have that in the high school programs that I went to. So when I went to college, I signed up for a art class, and soon became very discouraged because everybody else had art lessons and was a lot better at art. But then it was just something that I always liked to try to do. So when I actually started taking toll painting lessons when I was probably 50, and from that they introduced you to painting oil paints on canvas, and I just started taking lessons and trying to do things, and haven't had very much watercolor training, but I like watercolors very well. So it's just something that I've just really liked to do, and now is kind of a hobby that I can make watercolor cards for my kids. I laughingly say I used to try to remember everybody, but since I now have 38 great-grandchildren, they're just going to have to get things from their own grandparents and not from me. So this year I've only painted cards for my kids and my grandkids.
How many paintings have you made?
I have no idea. Maybe 100. I've have, some that I have now. I've given pictures away to grandkids, to friends, and to different things. Sold a very few, maybe 4 in my life.
What do you like most about painting?
I think it's just the challenge of it. I've sort of laughed at that because I've seen a lot of older ladies who paint who say, "Oh, it's so relaxing." I do not find painting relaxing. If I would paint late at night, I would be so hyper I wouldn't be able to go to sleep. And I guess I'm more critical of what I'm doing for it to be pleasurable. So, I mean, it is pleasurable, but it's not something that's, that I find very comforting. I laugh because I have known a couple of people who would paint something and say, "Oh, isn't this wonderful?" And I have a tendency to say, paint something and think, I wonder if I'd done that differently, if it had been different, better, So I tend to be kind of critical of what I'm doing.
This is a 15-minute. What was your first painting that you made?
Probably a painting of a house and some rocks, and that I think I gave it to Jana actually, and in later years I've looked at that and think I wish they'd throw that away. The rocks tend to look like potatoes.
Could you say that again, but repeat the question? So you would say, my first painting was, and then the story. That way we don't have to use my voice in this at all.
My first painting was probably a painting that I gave to Jana years ago. Had a house and some rocks and a road, and I wished that they'd throw it away because the rocks look like potatoes.
Okay, thanks. Look like potatoes. Well, up at Orem, we're always digging out, we call them Orem potatoes, and they're rocks. All right. Have you ever lost something that you never found again that you wish you...
Oh, I have lost some things in my life, yes, that I wish that I could find. Years ago, when Ken, our first baby, was little, and we lived in St. Anthony, we lived across the bridge. In St. Anthony, you have to go across the Snake River into town, and I used to walk to town every day. Hig had bought me an Indian bracelet and an Indian ring, turquoise. As we were walking across to see Ken's dad, he was fussy, and I handed him my bracelet to play with, and he evidently threw it down somewhere that I don't know. I guess you know that I paced back and forth looking for that for days and probably weeks because I felt so bad. Never found it. Somebody else must have. And right now, in my old age, I have put something away that I can't find that's making me pretty unhappy. I bought an opal ring when Hig and I went to Australia, and I was showing it to some of my grandkids. That's the last memory of it. I have this faint memory that I put it some strange place, but I have yet to find the strange place. So, sorry, my life has been filled with little losses here.
what is the most important thing to you now?
Friends and family are the most important things to me at this age. I tell my friends that I am able probably to stay in my own home because of the things that they do to help me. And I don't think, I just feel really blessed because not everybody has sweet friends that do all of the things that they do for me. I have a next door neighbor who brings me food every night and tries to tell me that I'm just eating her leftovers and teaching her children service because the little children bring the food over a lot of the time. And I appreciate that so much. And then I have another friend, Sue Winkle, who I called one day to ask her if she'd help me change my sheets because it was hard to get these old sheets around the corner. So ever since then, she came and helped me, but every week or two, I'll come home and find my bed all turned down like a hotel, and she's put fresh sheets on my bed. And so you can see how much blessed I am. Pardon me, I'll get weepy.
That's okay. Earlier you did it, you introduced yourself, but if you had one sentence to say to introduce yourself, what would it be? What would you want people to know you for?
My name is Jean Higginbotham. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I am blessed to have 8 children.
And one great and one fantastic grandchild. Okay, you want to hold that picture up of Grandpa? You and Grandpa?
Yep.
Let me focus on that real quick.
This is a wedding picture of my husband and I. A friend of my mother's made my wedding gown, which is made of white satin. And my aunt sent some orange blossoms, which are at the top of my veil.